Yeah, I wanted to start by giving a sort of a brief introduction to the project because I know a number of people who are here tonight are not necessarily familiar with it from the inception. Talk a little bit about our method, and then go on to some of the things that, some of the sort of striking things or surprising things that I've seen emerge within the research. And then I'm going to share a couple of stories more in depth, and then a look to the future. So this project was conceived 5 years ago. Jennifer Carroll and I, both institutions, had been thinking about ways to research Black people's history in the region and other people of color. And we decided that, what was available to us really had a lot of holes in it, and there really needed to be kind of a systematic study. So we divvied up the region roughly into east and west, with Historical Society of Cheshire County kind of taking the lead on the towns you see here in the sort of purple color, and the Monadnock Center for History and Culture taking the towns in the green. And it was expansive, the idea of doing the entire region. That's 34 towns. Um, but knowing that people move around, um, town histories can be very intimately related to their neighbors' histories, it didn't make sense to just cherry pick a few towns, but to really do the whole region as a whole. And then we were also quite expansive in our time frame, 1730 to 1930, with our early date being selected as that's sort of the earliest time when we see European settlers coming into the region along the Connecticut River Valley. The eastern side of the region actually settles just a little bit later than 1730. And then 1930, because we wanted to take it into the 20th century, but we didn't want to get into sort of researching and publicizing the history of people that might still be around. So we kind of cut it off at 1930. And like I said, we needed it to be systematic. When a researcher comes to either of our institutions and says, "Oh, what have you got on the Cutter family?" In very short order, we're able to go to published town histories, to maybe collections that have been donated by family members, and can pull together, a reasonable set of information. But that's because 100 years ago, 125 years ago, people were collecting all of that information and compiling it and putting it into kind of a useful way to access it. That hasn't been done for Black folks living in the region, other people of color like Native American people. So that was really our job, was to try to do that work that the antiquarians 125 years ago did. We were certainly aided by the fact that we have the internet now, and many records are digitized. And in fact, during the worst of the pandemic was the most intensive period of research, because all of our volunteers, and by the way, we did use volunteer researchers, we call them the citizen archivists, to dig through a lot of these records for us and start collecting this information. So you see on the left-hand side of your screen, that's just a shot from a 1790 census record. And on the right, you'll see this kind of graphic that I made. We knew that we had to kind of go through layers. In order to dig into things like birth, marriage, and death records, you need people's names. One of the ways we were able to collect names was through censuses, and then also town histories. And as we've gone along, then we've been getting into sort of the deeper layers of research, looking into court records, church records, the military records, all sorts of different things that can really fill out the life story of an individual or a family. We have not done that deep dive for every single person that we've found so far. As you can imagine, this is incredibly time-consuming kind of research. But we still have kind of a core group of researchers that are working on different individuals and families and coming up with, amazing stuff. So where did all of this research, where has it left us after 5 years? We developed a system for collecting the research in one central place, which is a spreadsheet, a Google spreadsheet. Our researchers use a form to enter the information so they don't have to kind of wrangle with a huge spreadsheet. And to date, we have 2,729 lines of data in that spreadsheet. Each line of data represents information from a particular source about a particular person. Those 2,729 lines represent information revealing the histories of about 500 individuals and families, which I am sort of amazed and very proud that we've gotten that far. This system, certainly not the most elegant system that we could have used, but the price was right. It was free. And when we set up this project, we didn't really have a budget. We just kind of bootstrapped it. Like, okay, let's try this. Let's see what happens. And we've just kind of been moving it along in that fashion. Over time, we have received some funding, particularly around building the website, but it continues to be something that we're just keep moving forward and figuring out each step as we go. So the website we launched on June 19th of last year. And if you haven't visited, it's at bipocmonadnock.org. The website was a long time in coming, and it's a work in progress. So we're continually adding new records to this site. So if you visited last June, you're going to find a lot more there than there was then. And I recommend, if you're interested in the subject, that you return, frequently. But I'm going to take you on a little bit of a tour of the website. This is the homepage, and on the homepage, you're going to see these are just the most recent records that have been added. You can go to search by town. Here we're searching Keene, and you can see there's quite a lot for Keene. So you might say, well, within Keene, that's a lot. Let me sort it alphabetically, make more sense of it. So you can do it that way. Or you might say, oh, I remember there was something about a Black-owned business, Cooper's Cafe. Is there something there about that? And there we go, Philip Cooper. And that'll take you to the record. And you'll notice that the record also includes citations to the source materials, because that was important to us, that everything can be traced back to where we found it. Now, you can also search just the entire site. Oh, I know there's an article about a woman named Dinah in Peterborough. So where is she? There she is. And now I can read the story. There's some imagery that goes with it, as well as this little video that I'm showing you is not moving as fast as I'm talking. There's a genealogical summary, and again, the source materials. And I just want to say a word about the genealogical summary. We decided when we were putting together how the website would work and what it would look like and include, that having these genealogical summaries was important, because if you open up the genealogy for the town of Peterborough in the published histories, you're not going to find Dinah Freeman. So we wanted to create sort of the online version of that town history with this, where each person's genealogy would be spelled out. It also makes it a lot easier to understand the stories when you have something to refer to. Oh, this is the daughter, this is the aunt, etc. So getting on to the idea around sort of striking things, this is a late addition for me, actually. I just noticed this last night as I was preparing for today. I realized that we have found in a number of places that there are place names in the region that are named for people of color from the past, and these names persist today. although I bet a lot of people don't know where the name came from. So on the left, you see Dinah's Rock in Surrey. Dinah was actually a Native American woman who lived in Surrey. The very earliest record associated with her is from 1769, the birth of her son. She lived in Surrey her whole life and was known to rest on this big flat rock on her way to and from the village. And she passes away in 1812 at the age of 73. In 1884, a townsperson, native of Surrey, lived there his whole life. He inscribed on that rock, Dinah's Rock. And I guess it's still referred to that way today. The center image, which is from Harris Center, is of Jack's Pond in Hancock. Jack was Jack Ware, and he had been kidnapped in Africa around 1725, 1726, brought to the colonies and enslaved. We don't know how he gained his freedom, but he does end up in Hancock, and he lived in a small house on the edge of this pond, and it became known as Jack's Pond. He died in 1826 at the age of 100. And then finally on the right, Peggy's Brook in Peterborough. Peggy was the daughter of Dinah, who I just showed you on the website. Dinah had been enslaved in Peterborough. Peggy was born free after Dinah gained her freedom. This brook, which is known as Peggy's Brook, is right near where their house site was. And you can see the Peggy Freeman there in the house site. I'm not sure if we've found others. These were the three that suddenly dawned on me. But it's something that I want to look into some more because I think that's really interesting, that there are these names that persist to this day. Another thing that we've talked about is how it would be really nice to be able to map all of these folks, to hopefully see some connections and some things that mapping can show us. So maybe in the future, we'll be able to find a way to do that. Another thing that has been really striking is how many slaves and the prevalence of enslavement in the region was. Now, the towns that I'm showing you here, this is based on censuses, because before the first federal census is 1790. And by that time, enslavement is kind of on its way out in New Hampshire, although it was never specifically outlawed, as it was in other states. But there were provincial censuses, 4 of them. And when we look at those provincial censuses, we find these towns returning numbers for enslaved people, as well as references in town histories talking about enslavement during the colonial period. So this is 19 out of the 34 towns, and several of these have several enslaved people. I wasn't able to get an exact number before tonight, but I'll give you an example. At its height, Peterborough had 8 enslaved people in the community. Another thing that has been really striking to me is the incidence of child enslavement. And what I'm referring to here is not children born to enslaved people and then enslaved themselves, but children who are sold or given away from their mothers into other households and then brought to the region. In the South, slave owners it was desirable to them to have enslaved women giving birth and increasing the numbers of their slave holdings. In the North, it was somewhat different. Because enslavement in the North is very diffuse, it's not the plantation system. What we find in colonial New England is that a household might have one or two enslaved people in it. Very few had more than that. And you don't see anything that even resembles sort of plantation enslavement, except in some cases in Rhode Island. Um, so for northern enslavers, the birth of of a child was really just an economic burden. Um, you have to remember this is the days before childhood vaccinations, and children, frequently died in childhood. A child is not really economically useful until they're about 8 or 10 years old. And before that, you would be just paying for their upkeep and without getting really anything in return, as well as the distraction and the time and the labor taken away from other things in caring for that child. And because of that, infants and toddlers were often sold very inexpensively to people who would take them, and even given away. So here's 3 examples that we've run across. Baker Moore was bought as an infant in Boston in 1755. He was later brought to Peterborough as an 11-year-old, and then eventually purchased his freedom in 1776. He lived the rest of his life in Peterborough. He made his living as a fiddler. The gravestone that you see in the center is Pomp Russell. Pomp or Pompey Russell had been purchased in Andover, Massachusetts as an infant in 1761. That family in about 1766 or 67 moved to Wilton. He later served in the New Hampshire militia in the Revolutionary War. And after the war, at the age of 21, he gained his freedom. He moved to Nelson, what's today Nelson. And by the way, I'm using modern day place names. Nelson was called Packersfield then, where he married and had 2 sons. He and his family later left the area and went to Weld, Maine. And that's where this gravestone is. He's buried in Weld. And then the last one I'm showing you on the right there, that gravestone, is for Hannah Hackett. She had been brought to Hillsborough as a small child about 1775 from Portsmouth. And she never married. She taught school. She ran a little store. And eventually she saved enough money to buy herself a house and lived out the rest of her life in Hillsborough, dying at the age of 98. Another surprise for me, although I knew there had been Black patriots in the Revolution, I was really surprised by how many Black patriots we've found here in the Monadnock region. So we found 28 altogether. 21 of them were Monadnock region men, and then 7 were veterans who came here after the war. On this slide, you'll see the red stars next to the men's names those are the men who died in the service of the Revolution. So with the 250th anniversary of the Battle of Lexington just about 6 weeks away, I decided to focus on a couple of these soldiers to share a little bit more of an in-depth story, some in-depth stories from our research. And the first person I want to tell you about is Aaron Oliver of Temple. So Aaron Oliver had been born in Malden, about 1750, Malden, Massachusetts. We're not sure how he ends up coming to Temple, but by 1775, he's a free man of color. He's living in Temple with his wife, Abigail, and their 2 small children, 2 little boys, and he's a farmer. On April 23rd, 1775, so this is just 4 days after the Battle of Lexington, Aaron Oliver enlists for a period of 8 months. He comes home and then has a second enlistment in March of 1777. At that point, his group, he is with a number of Monadnock Region men, and they are sent up to Fort Independence on Lake Champlain across from Ticonderoga. And that's the map that you see on your left. And you'll see up at the top here, Fort Independence and Ticonderoga. They're there in July of 1777. General Burgoyne of the British forces has a plan that they're going to come down Lake Champlain and then over to the Hudson River and basically cut New England off from the rest of the colonies because if materials, supplies, money, and men can't move between New England and the rest of in New York and New Jersey, etc., then that'll be the end of the war. That they'll basically just sort of, it'll be a stranglehold that can't be broken. And so the Continentals, they know this, they need to stop this. So they're fortifying what's called Fort Independence in the hope of heading that off. They think they've got it clinched, but the British outmaneuver them and they're forced to retreat. So they head along the road to Castleton to regroup and launch a new offensive. And it's a terrible route. The British with Hessian soldiers follow them, and there's a battle at the town of Hubbardton. This is the only Revolutionary War battle fought in Vermont. And a large number of men are on both sides are killed, and a lot of the American troops are taken prisoner, including Aaron Oliver. After that, he's shown on the muster rolls as missing in action. Eventually, I'm sorry, not as missing in action, but as prisoner. Eventually, about 8 months after he was taken prisoner, he's released and he returns to Temple. But his health is so broken from starvation and the conditions as a prisoner of war that he passes away. And he's only 27 years old. This leaves poor Abigail and her two little sons, on their own. And just a few months after that, in December 1777, the Temple selectmen warned them out of the community. What that means, warning out was a mechanism for town governments to prevent having to support people who couldn't support themselves. So in those days, if somebody was disabled or very elderly or sick or widowed and unable to support themselves, it was incumbent upon the town to provide their support. One of the ways the town could avoid having to do that and have that expense was to say that that person didn't really belong to that town. They belonged to a different town, and that was called warning out. So you can't take it as necessarily a racist move on the town of Temple's part. It was really a matter of course that they would do this, particularly with new people to town. Just that it didn't mean they actually had to leave. It just meant that if you can't support yourself, we're not going to do it for you. But Abigail and the sons, we weren't able to find anything else in the records. We didn't know what happened to them. And ever since I learned this story, I would think, I wonder what happened to them. Where did they end up? How were they able to survive? They're not in Temple. They don't show up in any of the later censuses. Whatever happens to Abigail and her children? And then I was looking at the Hubbardton Battlefield website. It's a state park in Vermont It's just a small state park. And there was this picture, and that's the one you see on the right. And what you see there is a flask, a powder horn, um, a pouch for shot, and a little mirror. And and the caption said, "Artifacts carried by Aaron Oliver in the Battle of Hubbardton." So I got in touch with them, and I said, how did you come across, come by these things? They were given in 2016 by Aaron Oliver's direct descendants. So whatever happened to Abigail and her sons, they made it. And there are people today that are directly descended from Aaron Oliver, the Black Patriot from Temple. Now, this is another life story that is just fascinating about Pompey Woodward, who was from Sullivan. Now, Pompey was one of the men who came and settled in the region after the Revolution. He was born in 1762 in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, and he served with a Massachusetts regiment. He enlisted in 1776. He was just 14 years old. He was also at the Battle of Hubbardton in July 1777, traveling with the Continental Army and the militia units. He made it through that battle, and then they headed south to Bennington, where they were going to regroup and again engage with Burgoyne's forces. There, at the Battle of Bennington, the Americans took hundreds of prisoners. And this picture, which is in the collection of the Bennington Museum in Bennington, Vermont, shows after the battle and the prisoners being brought into Bennington. And notice the meeting house behind them. The picture up in the upper right is taken from the larger, this is a huge mural actually. That picture right there of the Black soldier on horseback, that is modeled to be Pompey Woodward. He was involved with escorting the prisoners and then standing guard. The night of the battle, the night after the battle, a number of prisoners, including Hessians, had been placed in that meeting house. And there was some kind of disturbance. And the American sentries who were guarding the meeting house lost their cool and shot them inside the meeting house, wounding several and killing several. Now, this action never made it into the official reports. General Stark and the other generals involved, they never mentioned that this happened. But there was a young woman who many years later wrote a reminiscence about her experience of the Battle of Bennington. And she talked about caring for some of those wounded prisoners of war. In the 1990s, there was a historian, Richard Ketchum. He's a historian of the revolutions, written a number of books. He was working on a book about Saratoga and including information about the Battle of Bennington. And he had read that reminiscence, but couldn't find anything in the official records. And, you can't take one reminiscence as being fact. So he kind of tucked that away and didn't think much more about it. And then he was looking at the pension applications of the soldiers that had been there at the Battle of Bennington, and he read Pompey Woodward's pension application. So one of the things you need to realize about these pension applications is this is the very first time that the country is giving pensions to soldiers, and they're it's many years after the war that the act is finally passed. Pompey makes his application in 1832. So they were asked to to recount their service because they needed to prove that they were actually who they said they were and that they, actually served. So this was a way to kind of verify that you were worthy of having a pension. Some of these just have kind of like a list of the places that they went. Others are more like this one, and I know you can't read that on the screen. It's hard to read it just on paper. The handwriting's difficult. But I show it because you can see that his is very much more in a narrative format, where he's talking about his experience all the way through and the places he went and who he served under. And in here, he talks about being there at the meeting house and witnessing the sentries shooting the prisoners of war. And Robert Ketchum reads this and remembers the reminiscence, and it's like, oh, so almost 200 years or more than 200 years later, he's able to verify that that reminiscence was true and that that really did happen. Now, Pompey was discharged in November 1777. And by the way, he did get his pension. After he was discharged, he settled in Sterling, Massachusetts, and he married and had a daughter named Millie in 1790. His wife passed away not long after that, and he remarried, and he moved with her to Sullivan, where they farmed. They lived there for over 40 years. He died in Sullivan in 1843. In 1938, the Works Progress Administration made funds available for marking unmarked Revolutionary War soldiers' graves. And a group of interested citizens from Keene applied for that money and were able to erect this monument, which is in the Four Corners Cemetery in Sullivan. And I'm going to also just mention, I forgot to mention when I had the mural up, the mural is also a WPA project. They made monies available to museums, regional museums like the Bennington Museum, to pay local artists to paint paintings and murals of local history subjects. And that mural was commissioned specifically by the Bennington Museum to record the Battle of Bennington. When they did those, the museum staff would work with the artists to really get the details right. And that's why Pompey Woodward makes an appearance there. Now, the future. Where is the project going? So the biggest thing is we're continuing the research. The research is not by any means done. And as I mentioned in the beginning, we have a lot of names, and many of them we've been able to do kind of a deep dive into the primary sources. Others not, we haven't had a chance to do those yet. So we're working with volunteer researchers to continue to fill out these stories. The amazing thing about this research is that the more you dig, the more you find. It often takes many hours, but when you find those kernels of information that then lead you to other things, and you really start to be able to put together people's stories and what their experiences were like, it's incredibly rewarding and important to do. We want to continue to add these life stories to the BIPOCmonadnock.org website to make them available to people. Like, I hope that Aaron Oliver's family will find that and see that his life has been honored where he lived. Other descendants of people, of these 500 people that we've found, but also teachers and students and people interested in local history. Now that these are out there in the world in a way that people can access them, there's just no way of telling what kind of research or artwork or school curricula. There's so many different ways they could be used. And so we just want to keep building that up and making it as rich as possible. And then I also say that we have been working with students, mostly college and graduate students, although we have had a few high school students on the project. And with those students, we're really working on things that contextualize the research, so that we're not just looking at these life stories in isolation, but linking them up to bigger themes in American history, in the history of the Black experience in New England. So those students are working on specialized projects using the data, and then also working on digital humanities projects. These can be things like what they call story maps, different ways of presenting humanities materials like these in a digital format, accessible online to people anywhere. And then last, I hope that we can start to use the information as a way to identify opportunities for commemoration and historical markers. And I'll be honest with you, for a long time in my career, I was not really interested in historical markers. They felt sort of like, that's something they did 100 years ago. It's not, didn't feel sort of cutting edge to me in any way. But I've come to realize that there's something very, very powerful about marking things within the landscape and putting things in metal or stone, because they last a really long time. And people will encounter them. They don't have to go looking for them. They will just come upon them, and that information will become part of their experience. So I've really done a complete 180 on historical markers, and I'm for them now. The Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire has really developed a marking program, where they're looking to really expand beyond the places that they've already done a lot of historical marking, like in Portsmouth, to the rest of the state, and to show that, Black people, people of color, have had a history across New Hampshire, not just on the seacoast. And so we hope we'll be able to work with them to identify some likely places here in the region that should have markers. And then also I'll say commemoration. It occurs to me, so Monadnock Center is in Peterborough. We have a Black patriot from Peterborough, Titus Wilson, who died at the Battle of Hubbardton. And there's no marker in our cemetery for him. So I'm also hoping that, maybe local communities will be inspired to mark some of those kind of places, like put a marker up for Titus Wilson or for Aaron Oliver in Temple. So I think there's a lot of different ways this information could be used to do that kind of marking out into the landscape. And last, I just want to say, as always, a huge thank you to the citizen archivists, because we would not have all of this without the many hours, and I mean many. I can't even imagine at this point, it has to be thousands of hours of research that folks put in to help gather these stories. And of course, thank you to the sponsors for helping to support financially. Now, I'm going to stop my share. I feel like I kind of blasted through that pretty fast, but that'll give us more time for questions and answers, I think. So there we go. Yes, well, not really. That was good 40 minutes. It seems faster when you're doing it.
So I don't see if we have any questions yet in the Q&A, but one question I thought of while you were talking was, what kinds of stories would you like to find or discover that haven't been discovered yet?
Huh. Well, what kinds of stories haven't we found that I'd like to find? I'd really love to find I'd love to find some first person documentation from people of color in the region, like a diary or letters. And, and now that I'm saying that, I think Jenna mentioned that they did find something that was first person, but I'd love to see that, because I'd really love to hear directly from the person. Um, the others, it's hard to say other stories because what we have found so much runs the gamut of kind of human experience. We've got people who were a doctor, a veterinarian, an inventor, uh, all sorts of different tradespeople, professional people, mothers, um, and then people that are really in difficult circumstances, a murderer. So really, I'm not sure that we can. There's just so many different stories there already. It would be hard to say which one is missing.
And I see we have a question in the Q&A. One is Sharon Sweet asks, how does one become a citizen archivist? And do you have to be local to the Monadnock region?
um, okay, so if you're interested in being a citizen archivist, we're happy to talk with you about that. Um, it does involve a little bit of training, um, mostly around how we collect the information so that it all feeds into that sort of central repository. Um, at this point, we're working with people, sort of assigning them a family or an individual and sharing what we've got so far, and then recommendations for where to go next. You don't have to be local to the Monadnock region. Some of the deeper dives do involve things that are not online and having to go and look at original records. So I would recommend that, you know, if you're not local, there may be sort of a stopping point for you because you don't have easy access to do that. But certainly we should talk about it because it's all very individual anyways. But you can get in touch with me or Jennifer. Well, Jennifer's on vacation this week, so if you want a fast answer, get in touch with me.
And the next question was, how can descendants of people in your database become aware of the website?
um, that's something that I'm not sure about. I know that just having noodled around a little bit in the last week, putting some of the folks' names into Google, that the website is ranking nice and high in the Google searches. So, like if you put Pompey Woodward in Google, we're going to be on that first page of search results. So, I think just the wonders of the web is the way that a lot of people will be able to find it.
And the next question is, when people of color were enslaved in Cheshire County, what roles did they play? Like, were they a maid or were they a farm worker?
That's a super good question. The nature of enslavement in New England, as I mentioned before, is so different than the plantation system in the South. So in the South, there were, pretty uh, pretty defined roles. People worked in the field, some people worked in the house, and then there might be a select few that were trained like as a blacksmith or a tanner or something like that, and worked in those kind of workshops. In New England, it was very much more people were sort of the jack of all trades, and that's true for white people and black people because these early New England communities, everybody was a farmer. Everyone farmed. The minister had a farm, but then they also had other things. They might be a minister, they might be a doctor, they might keep a store or a tavern. they might be a tanner or a wheelwright or someone who made shoes. You know, everybody had those sort of multiple hats that they wore. And enslaved people were very much part of the household, and they also wore multiple hats. So they might be, um, you know, doing a lot of the farm labor, which then freed up the enslaver to work on other things. Or they might be working side by side in the wheelwright shop with the person enslaving them. And I think we all know that when it's time for haying, everyone's out in the field. You know, the kids, the mom, everybody, because the hay's got to get in. So these people just, it was not as clearly defined as you would think.
And the next question is about uncovering and discussing people, other like BIPOC people, indigenous people, other people of color, and has this project identified anyone else who is either indigenous or another person of color? And what are ways that and what are the different ways that those people's stories can be uncovered?
Right. Yeah, by the very nature of how we've been looking at stuff, particularly with the census records, we have uncovered um excuse me, indigenous people, um, other people of color, um, even people of Asian descent. Um, Also because our time frame is so wide, we've, like the excuse me, frog in my throat. The folks of Asian descent were, you know, 1890 to 1920, much different time frame than the enslavement period. Um, we've been collecting that information. I don't think, and Jennifer can correct me if I'm wrong. Um, I don't think that we've written up a lot of those stories yet. Um, but I don't think that the method is any different. It's just where we would go looking, the kinds of records. But as far as sort of peeling away the layers of all the records would be the same. I think the method would be exactly the same.
And we had another question was Christopher Mann enslaved by Captain Benjamin Mann, who led the Mason militia in the Battle of Bunker Hill?
Actually, no, he was not. Christopher Mann was enslaved by Benjamin's father, James. And it's sort of crazy that I know that so specifically, but he's come up in something else I've been looking at. So I've recently been digging into the Mann family. So no, he was in Benjamin's household when Benjamin was growing up, but Benjamin was not the enslaver.
And the next part of the question was, did he go with the militia to the Battle of Bunker Hill?
Um, that is what has been out there and written so far. Um, but I'm not positive that it's the same Christopher Mann. I have reason to believe that it might not be, but I can't give you a definitive answer.
And I see Jenna is posting in the webinar chat, but I'm not sure if the attendees are able to see that. And she clarified that we do tag bios of Indigenous families, individuals on the website with Native history.
Oh, okay. Yes, that's another piece of the functionality on the website is there are tags. So you can go to those tags, choose Native history, and all of the posts that have to do with that would all group together for you.
And I saw that there was another chat, and it was from, and it says there's someone posted a question in chat, and the question was, what is the best way for us to support this work?
Um, well, if you want to get involved as a researcher, definitely reach out and talk to us. That's not necessarily everyone's cup of tea, but they would still like to be supportive. So I think there's two ways you can do that. Definitely share it with people that you know that it's going on, um, that there's a website that you can go to, and that interesting things are coming out of it. But also, it really comes down to having the resources to do the work. And that website has ongoing costs. So you can make a financial gift or become a member of either Historical Society of Cheshire County or Monadnock Center for History and Culture. I recommend that you be a member of both.
And I don't see any other questions in the Q&A, but one that I had, another question that I had is what is, and you went into some of these, but what are some of the other goals or milestones for this project going forward?
um, well, I think, you know, getting the website done was a huge milestone. And while it won't be as sort of dramatic as launching a website, to be able to show a track record of continuously adding new material and continuing to be able to shepherd along volunteer researchers to do those deep dives. Um, I think that's a big goal for the short term. We have not put an end date on the project very specifically because this is something that it is so time consuming. Um, we don't want to give it a sort of an artificial end date and now we can't do, we're done. We can't do anymore. Um, we'd rather leave it open ended so that the work can continue. Um, I'd love to see at some point some kind of an exhibit, but we haven't made any firm plans for that at this point.
Okay, so, and I did have one more question written down so that I came up with. And what are some of the discoveries that surprised or impressed you the most over the last 5 years?
Um, Jennifer just posted again, and she said another big goal would be connecting what's going on here, or what was going on here, the history here, with other towns and communities around us and throughout New England. Making those bigger connections into New England's history. So can you repeat that question? I'm sorry.
Okay. It was over the last 5 years, what were some of the discoveries that either surprised you or impressed you the most?
Surprised or impressed me. Um, well, there's been so many different things that I just wasn't expecting. Um, no, we went into this not having a huge amount of sort of background information about Black history in New England. We've been learning and educating ourselves as we've gone along. Um, I've been really impressed with the fact that so many communities across New England, whether it's local museum historical societies like us or the local college. I even know of one that is a local high school teacher heading up a project, that people are really digging into this history to bring it together, to bring it to a modern audience, to record it and to memorialize. And it's happening all across New England, from like Castine, Maine, way the heck up there, down to Connecticut and everywhere in between. People are doing this work, and it's ongoing like it is for us. So that has been really impressive to me, that there's just been this kind of groundswell to do this. Um, so many little things have surprised me and it made me think and made me consider things in a different way. But that, I think that's one of the biggest ones. The other thing, and this is purely, you know, It's just because it's so nice. I just have to say that the state of Massachusetts has done an incredible job digitizing their historic records. So anytime we have a connection into Massachusetts, it's so easy to find things and the images are beautiful. And we don't have that quite to the same degree here in New Hampshire. Massachusetts would serve as a nice model.
Okay, well, I'm not seeing any more questions, and that's all the questions I had thought of. So I'm just going to give people another a few moments to submit any other questions they have, or send anything in the chat. But in the meantime, Michelle, I would like to thank you for. Oh, that was great, Michelle and Peter. Thank you. Okay, cool. And well, Michelle, I would like to thank you for joining us tonight and giving us this update about the Black History Project.
Well, thank you. And thank all of you for being here. I enjoyed being able to share it. It's one of my favorite things to talk about.
All right. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and have a good rest of your week.